Dust clung to Clara's hem like it had nowhere better to be. She stood on the platform at Harland's Crossing, Nebraska, watching the last car of the Orphan train disappear around the bend of the cottonwoods, and she understood with a clarity that was almost peaceful that she had been left behind. Not forgotten, the matron had looked right at her before climbing aboard. Left behind on purpose, which was somehow worse. The placard around her neck read Clara Marsh, AGE 22, teacher, and someone had crossed out the word suitable in red ink. She did not know when that crossing out had happened. She suspected it had been there for some time. The morning was cool for September, the kind of cool that promised something meaner was coming. Clara set her carpetbag on the bench and sat beside it, and looked at the town. Harland's Crossing was 3 buildings and an ambition. A general store with a crooked eave, a livery that smelled its purpose from 50 yards, a church that appeared to be losing an argument with gravity. Beyond the town, the high grass rolled away to the west in waves, and the sky above it was enormous and indifferent. She had $12.40. She had a change of dress, a primer on arithmetic, 2 novels she had already read, and a certificate from the Rosewood Home for Indigent Women that confirmed she was sober, literate, and of good moral character. The certificate had not proven as useful as advertised. A wagon pulled up to the far end of the platform. The man driving it climbed down without hurry, the way men climb down from wagons when they are accustomed to doing it alone and have stopped expecting help. He was broad-shouldered, maybe 35, with a jaw that looked like it had been borrowed from a cliff face. He tied the horse's reins to the post and walked toward the station master's window. He did not look at Clara. He looked at the empty tracks. Then he looked at Clara. "You come off that train?" he said. "The train left without me," she said. He took his hat off, turned it once in his hands, and put it back on. "Huh," he said, and that single syllable carried more careful thought than most men put into a paragraph. Smoke drifted from the general store's chimney. The horse at the post stamped once and was still. Clara waited, because she had learned that waiting was a thing she was good at, and she did not yet know that waiting was about to become unnecessary. "My name is Samuel Briggs," the man said. "I've got a daughter. She's 4 years old and she hasn't spoken in 2 months, and I don't know why. I came to town to file a notice for a housekeeper." He looked at the station master's window, then back at Clara. "Notice boards inside." "I can see that," Clara said. "You a teacher?" She touched the placard at her throat. "It says so." Samuel Briggs looked at his boots, then at the vanished tracks, then at Clara, with an expression that was not quite hope, but was adjacent to it, the way a man looks at a sky that might or might not hold rain. "I can't pay much," he said. "I can pay some. And there's a room. It's small. But it's got a window that faces east." Clara thought about $12.40. She thought about the crossed-out word on her placard. She thought about a 4-year-old girl who had stopped talking, and about how silence in a child was not emptiness, but something fuller and more frightened than that. "What's her name?" Clara said. "Rosie," he said. And the way he said it, quiet and helpless and all the way from the bottom of him, settled the matter entirely. Clara stood up and picked up her carpetbag. "I'll need my own shelf in the kitchen," she said, "for my books and my things, and I'll need Sundays free until noon." He nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who had not expected negotiation, and found he didn't mind it. "All right," Samuel said. "All right," Clara said. And that was the bargain, plain as the Nebraska sky and just as large. The wagon ride to the Briggs homestead took the better part of an hour. Clara sat on the bench beside Samuel and watched the land open up around her, the way a book opens to a chapter you didn't know you needed. He did not make conversation, and neither did she, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable so much as honest. The horse moved at an easy pace, A meadowlark called from somewhere in the grass and did not repeat itself. "How long since your wife passed?" Clara asked, when the silence had been comfortable long enough to risk it. He kept his eyes on the trail. 14 months. "I'm sorry. You didn't do it." That was the full extent of condolences exchanged, and Clara respected him for not adding anything sentimental. Grief was private business. She had seen enough of it at Rosewood to know that people carried it differently, and the ones who carried it silently were not cold. They were simply careful with it, the way you are careful with anything you cannot afford to break further. The homestead appeared over a low rise, and Clara's first impression was of solitude made visible. A clapboard house in decent repair, a barn larger than the house and in better shape, a kitchen garden that had gone to seed in that particular way that said a woman's attention had been removed from it. 3 chickens of strong, independent spirit roamed the yard. A 4th sat on the porch step as though guarding it. Rosie was on the porch. She was small even for 4, with dark hair in 2 uneven braids that someone had attempted with more love than skill. She wore a dress that was too big and boots that were the right size, which suggested Samuel had priorities and stuck to them. She watched the wagon approach with large, serious eyes and did not move. Clara climbed down before Samuel could come around to help her. She walked to the porch steps and crouched down to be at Rosie's level. The girl watched her with the unblinking assessment only small children and cats can manage without rudeness. "Hello, Rosie," Clara said. "My name is Clara. I'm going to be staying here for a while and helping around the house. I brought a book with pictures of animals in it. There's a very dignified-looking bear on page 14. She paused. "You don't have to talk to me. Not yet. Not ever, if you'd rather not. But I'll be here." Rosie looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked past Clara to her father, who stood by the wagon with his hands in his pockets, and an expression Clara could not yet read, though she was already beginning to learn its grammar. Then Rosie slid off the step and walked inside the house. "She didn't run," Samuel said from behind her. "No," Clara agreed. "She didn't run." Inside, the house was clean in the way a man cleans. Surfaces wiped, floors swept, but the small graces missing. No curtains on the east window. No cloth on the kitchen table. The cook stove was a good one, and someone had kept the flue in order. There were 2 chairs at the table and a small stool pulled up between them. Clara looked at the stool for a moment, and then at the table, and understood the geometry of this household's grief and love all at once. Her room was off the kitchen. Samuel had not exaggerated. It was small, and the east window was real. Someone had laid a folded quilt on the narrow bed. She thought it might have been Rosie who put it there, though she could not have said why she thought so. She hung up her extra dress, set her books on the windowsill in lieu of the promised shelf, and went back to the kitchen to make supper. She found cornmeal, dried beans, a smoked ham hock, and a pride of onions in the cellar. She found an iron pot that was better seasoned than most married women's. She made a soup that would take 2 hours and smell like intention the entire time. Rosie appeared in the kitchen doorway at the 40-minute mark, drawn by the smell like it was a rope pulled gentle. She sat in the smaller of the 2 chairs and watched Clara stir without blinking. Clara narrated what she was doing, the way she had learned to do at Rosewood with the children who needed sound without pressure. "The salt goes in now," she said. "The fat rises to the top and we skim it off. Soup wants time, same as most good things." Rosie said nothing, but she stayed. When Samuel came in from the barn and saw the pot on the stove and Rosie in the chair and Clara at the stove with a dish towel over her shoulder, he stopped in the doorway and something moved across his face too fast for a name. "Wash up," Clara said. "It'll be ready in 20 minutes. He washed up. The first week at the Briggs homestead had the quality of a careful negotiation, conducted entirely in glances and small gestures. Clara cooked and cleaned and examined the kitchen garden with the thoroughness of a field general assessing captured territory. The garden was not lost, just neglected, which was a curable condition. She cleared the dead growth and turned the soil and planted the winter kale she had traded 3 of her remaining novels for at the general store in town. She was not sentimental about novels she had already read. She also assessed the house. The east window needed weather stripping. A hinge on the cellar door sang a complaint every time it opened. There was a shelf over the fireplace that was lopsided in a way that was clearly driving Samuel mad, because he looked at it every time he entered the room, and looked away again, the way you look away from something you have decided to tolerate and cannot. She straightened it while he was in the barn one morning, using a shim of pine she found in his toolbox. She did not mention it. He noticed at dinner and did not mention it either, but he looked at it with a different expression than before, and that was communication enough. Rosie followed Clara at a distance of about 4 feet. Always 4 feet. Not 3, not 5. Clara understood the mathematics intuitively, close enough to observe, far enough to retreat. She did not try to close the distance. She simply moved through her days and let the girl orbit her like a small, solemn moon. On the 4th day, Clara read aloud from the animal book at the kitchen table after supper. Samuel sat by the fireplace with his account ledger, pretending to add figures that were clearly not adding up to anything encouraging. Rosie sat across from Clara and looked at the pages with focused hunger. When Clara reached the bear on page 14, Rosie reached out and put one finger on the picture. Just the tip of her finger, touching the bear's drawn ear. "He looks serious," Clara said. Rosie did not speak, but she nodded, one solemn nod. Samuel's pencil stopped moving. The external trouble arrived in the form of Aldous Crane, which was a name that suited him. He was a land agent from a company called Western Consolidated Holdings, and he drove out to the Briggs property on a Wednesday in a buggy that was too clean for the roads it had traveled, which told you what you needed to know about how often he went where he was unwelcome. He had papers. He always had papers. Men like Aldous Crane believed that enough paper made a thing legal, and enough legal made it right, and enough right made it their property. "Mr. Briggs," he said, standing in the yard with his hat in his hand and his smile in full operation. "Western Consolidated has a genuine interest in this parcel. The aquifer that runs under your east pasture is of significant commercial value. We're prepared to make a fair offer." "I've heard your fair offers," Samuel said. He was standing at the fence post, and he did not move from it. "Harland Webb took one, lost his place inside a year. Mr. Webb's situation was unique. His situation was that he signed your paper, and then the paper changed. I can read, Mr. Crane." Crane's smile adjusted but did not leave. It was that kind of smile, adhesive. "The offer is time-limited. I'd encourage you to consider your daughter's future. A man alone, managing a place this size." His gaze moved to Clara, who had appeared in the doorway with a dish towel and an expression of absolute stillness, although perhaps circumstances have changed. "Circumstances," Samuel said, "are none of your business. If there's a Mrs. Briggs, the deed situation becomes somewhat more." "There is a Miss Marsh," Samuel said, "who is employed in this household and who does not need to hear your assessment of our circumstances, and there is a property line." He pointed to the post at the road. "It's behind you." Crane looked at Clara once more. His assessment was the kind that catalogued and dismissed in the same motion. Then he put his hat on and climbed back into his clean buggy. "I'll be in touch," he said. "You won't be welcome," Samuel said. They watched the buggy go. When it was small in the distance, Rosie appeared at Clara's hip. She had come through the door without either adult hearing her, and looked down the road with an expression that was not quite her father's, but was made of the same materials. "He smelled like hair oil," Rosie said. It was the first sentence she had spoken in 2 months. Her voice was small and certain and absolute. Clara felt the dish towel go still in her hands. She looked at Samuel. He was looking at Rosie with an expression that had no floor to it, an expression that a man only makes once or twice in a lifetime if he is lucky, when something he thought was gone comes back. He crossed the yard in 4 strides and crouched down in front of his daughter and did not say anything for a moment, because there was no sentence that was the right size for that moment. "He did," Samuel said finally. "He really did." That evening, after Rosie was in bed and the kitchen was quiet, Samuel made coffee, strong and thick, frontier coffee, the kind you could stand a spoon in, and poured 2 cups without asking if Clara wanted any. She had noticed he always did that, poured 2, never asked. It seemed important in some way she was still working out. They sat at the kitchen table. The lamp between them threw gold light on the scrubbed wood. "She hasn't talked since Eleanor died," Samuel said. It was the first time he had said his wife's name in Clara's presence. She noticed that he said it steadily, which meant he had made his peace with the saying of it, even if the peace was still fragile. Doctors in town said it sometimes happens, that she'd talk when she was ready. I believed them, but I stopped believing after a while. "She was ready," Clara said. She just needed something unremarkable to remark on. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was in the same family. "Hair oil," he said. "It was very bad hair oil," Clara said. He looked at his coffee cup. "Crane will come back," he said. "The water rights on the east pasture are what he wants. If he gets a judge to declare contested ownership, my wife's family has some claim, her brother says. It ties up the deed and then they offer to untangle it for a price nobody can pay." Clara considered this. "What does your wife's brother want?" "He wants the place sold and the money split. He never liked me, thought Eleanor married down. He said it without self-pity, which was more convincing than any protest would have been. Can he compel a sale? Not if the deed is held by a married couple. A widow's portion is contested. A wife's portion isn't." He said it to the coffee cup, not to her, and the not looking at her was its own kind of looking. Clara's hands were flat on the table. She studied them for a moment. "Is that what you're asking me?" she said. He looked up then. His eyes were the color of good creek water, she noticed, not for the first time. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "I told you the situation. Asking is a different thing, and I know the difference." "Then ask," Clara said. The lamp flame bent in a draft from the window that needed weather stripping. Samuel Briggs looked at Clara Marsh across a scrub table in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and wood smoke, and he asked her. He said, "I know this isn't what you planned for yourself. I know I'm a difficult man in a difficult situation, with a piece of land that someone is trying to take, and a daughter who talks now but didn't this morning, and that none of this is what any woman with choices would choose. But I think—" He stopped. He started again. "I think you're already here, and I think here is where you want to be, and I am asking you if you'll stay here proper and legal and as my wife, and I will not pretend it isn't also practical, because it is, but I would not ask if practical was the only reason." Clara looked at the weather-stripped window that she had already fixed in her mind for next Saturday. She looked at the lopsided shelf that was no longer lopsided. She thought of Rosie's finger on the bear's ear, and the word serious said in a nod. She thought of Eleanor's name, said steadily. "I'll need that shelf in the kitchen," she said. "For real, this time. Built proper." "I'll build it tomorrow," Samuel said. "And I want to teach school," she said. 3 days a week in town if a school can be arranged. I have a certificate." "I know you do. I read the placard." "I crossed out the word unsuitable myself," she said. "Before I noticed it was there in red. I crossed it out in black, and I've never regretted it." He looked at her with an expression that was more open than any she had yet seen on him. The expression of a man who has been a cliff face for a long time and has just remembered that cliffs are also made of something that was once warm. "I'll build the shelf," he said, "and I'll build a school if I have to nail one together from scratch." "You won't have to go that far," Clara said, "but I appreciate the commitment." They were married on a Saturday in October by the Reverend Oakes, who was not losing his argument with gravity so much as entering a long-term negotiation with it. The church had been straightened since Clara first saw it. She had organized a work party of 3 neighboring farm wives and a very willing deacon, and the church now stood at an angle that was technically vertical and spiritually confident. Rosie stood between them at the altar in a white dress Clara had made from bolt cloth and determination, her dark hair braided evenly for the first time, because Clara had learned the pattern of it. She held Samuel's hand on one side and Clara's on the other, and looked at the Reverend with the focused seriousness she brought to all things. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and said Samuel might kiss his bride, Rosie said clearly, in front of Reverend Oakes and the 3 farm wives and the deacon and a man named Peters who had wandered in from the cold and didn't know anyone, "Now she's not leaving." The Reverend chuckled. The farm wives pressed handkerchiefs to their eyes. Peters, who didn't know the story, applauded anyway because the sentiment was sound. Samuel looked at Clara. There was no cliff face left in his expression, not a stone of it. "No," he said, "she's not leaving." He kissed her then, and it was not a performance for the Reverend or the farm wives or the wandering Peters. It was the kind of kiss that is also a promise and also a home, the kind built not in a single moment but in a season of soup stirred and shelves straightened and silences kept and a small girl's finger touching a picture of a bear. Aldous Crane returned in November with fresh papers and a county surveyor and the self-assurance of a man backed by a company with more lawyers than the territory had judges. He found Samuel and Clara at the fence post together, side by side, and the deed in Clara's hand, both names on it now, filed at the county seat the previous month, and Rosie on the fence post watching him with those large, solemn eyes. He read the deed carefully. He read it again. His smile experienced a significant structural failure. "Western Consolidated will contest this," he said. "They're welcome to try," Samuel said. He said it quietly, the way a man says a thing he has already thought all the way to its end and found it doesn't trouble him. "Mr. Briggs." Mrs. Briggs drew up the language herself, Samuel said. "She's a teacher. She's particular about words." Clara looked at Crane pleasantly. "The deed references the water rights in sections 4 and 7 specifically," she said. "As a matter of law, a joint deed with both parties' names recorded is not contestable on the basis of a widow's estate, which is what your company's filing rested on. There is no widow here. You might want to explain that to your lawyers before they charge you for paperwork they can't win." Crane looked at her with an expression he had not planned for. He had planned for many things. He had not planned for this. He left. The clean buggy raised dust down the road, going away. Rosie watched it until it was gone. "He's still using the same hair oil," she said. "Some men don't learn," Samuel said. "Some do," Clara said, and she was not looking at the road when she said it. The shelf went up in the kitchen that same week, built proper, as promised, of good pine with square edges, at eye level for Clara when she stood at the stove. She put her books on it, and her arithmetic certificate, and the primer she would use when the school opened in the new year, in the reclaimed back room of the general store, which the storekeeper, a round, gossipy man named Hedges, had agreed to rent for a sum so reasonable it was nearly charitable, mostly because Rosie had looked at him with those eyes until he felt morally outpaced. On Christmas Eve, Rosie came to Clara in the kitchen while Samuel was in the barn and held out a ribbon. It was blue, the particular blue of the morning sky over the east pasture, and it had come from somewhere Clara could not account for, though she suspected the store in town and Samuel's pocket. "For your braid," Rosie said. She said it with the tone of one presenting a considered and final decision. Clara sat down on the kitchen floor. She sat right down on the floor. so she was level with Rosie. And she took the ribbon in both hands and looked at it and said, very quietly, "It's the prettiest color I've ever seen." "I picked it," Rosie said. "Papa said you got to pick and I picked this one." "You picked exactly right," Clara said. Rosie climbed into her lap without asking, which is the only way it should happen, and Clara held her and the blue ribbon and felt the warmth of the stove and heard Samuel's boots on the porch step and thought, "Here, this is where the train was always going." Friend, you never know where a road ends. Clara Marsh had a placard around her neck with a word crossed out in red and $12 to her name, and a train that left her standing on a platform in the September dust. And from all of that, from the leaving and the standing and the not knowing, came a home. A man who builds what he promises, a child who picks the right ribbon, a shelf at eye level with books on it. That is what the frontier asked of people, and what the best of them gave back. Not perfection, but presence. Not grand gestures, but a pot of soup that takes 2 hours and smells like intention the whole time. If this story warmed your heart, leave us a comment below. We'd love to hear about a time when an unexpected beginning led you somewhere better than you'd planned. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe so we can bring you more tales of courage and kindness from the Old West. Good night. God bless you and yours, wherever home has found you.